Welcome everybody to the big bus tour here in Philadelphia. My name's Ruth. I'll be your tour guide. And Shakia is our bus driver. She is a fabulous bus driver. Folks, the city of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth itself, was founded by a man named William Penn. William Penn was a converted Quaker. He grew up in a very wealthy family in England. His father owned a lot of land. He was also an admiral in the British Navy, William Penn's father. But William Penn, he converted to the Quakers in his early 20s, and as a Quaker in England, that was kind of illegal. You had one choice religiously in England at the time, and that was the Church of England, the Anglican Church. William Penn was arrested and jailed 5 times for his gathering of people to meet, as well as for his writing and his speaking for religious liberty. So William Penn received Pennsylvania as a land grant from King Charles II instead of 16,000 pounds that William Penn's father lent to King Charles II. He was never going to get that money back. William Penn did not care. He petitioned the king for the money. He did not want the money. He didn't need the money. He was hoping to get what he got, which was the land grant. William Penn had envisioned opening up the first settlement in America where you would be welcome to settle and to worship, or not any way you please, without any fear of either social or legal persecution. And that is Pennsylvania's creed, religious liberty. Keep in mind that William Penn would have been very serious about his own religious beliefs. I'm sure he would have invited you to meeting. He would have been more than happy to sit down and talk to you about all kinds of theological thoughts he might have had. Now, William Penn, very progressive guy, even though he was kind of religious. He had the city designed on a rectangle grid, a very modern idea in the late 1600s. The city just went from the Delaware River about 7 to 8 blocks to our left-hand side to 30th Street to the right-hand side. That is 2 miles. 2 miles east and west, and then just 1 mile north and south. William Penn, he envisioned a very garden-like city. The grid of the city was laid out on lots, huge lots. Enough space for a home, a large area for animals, and a garden. But things got very crowded in Philadelphia very quickly. It wasn't long before most of those lots had multiple buildings on. The population of Philadelphia was getting heavier, and so was the buildings. Okay, so we're in the park. Independence National Park takes up about 13 square blocks, but it's Chestnut Street in front of us where all the original government buildings were. You can see Independence Hall to the left-hand side, but on Chestnut Street there is also Carpenter's Hall, Newman's Hall, the old Customs House, the First Bank of the United States, the Second Bank of the United States, Benjamin Franklin's Philosophical Society, Liberty Museum, a Science Museum, a Maritime Museum, the Benjamin Franklin Museum, as well as the Museum of the American Revolution, which you should not leave Philadelphia without seeing. So what I mean is walk down Chestnut Street. William Penn made sure there was a large square park in every section of the city. A block and a half in front of us on the other side of Independence Hall is called Washington Square today, originally just called the Southeast Park. It's home of the unknown Revolutionary Soldier, more than 1,000 prisoners of war from the time that the British occupied the city, American prisoners of war, and about 1,000 people that died during the yellow fever epidemic of 1793 when we lost more than 8% of our population. Not the only place we were burying people then. Independence Hall itself, of course, this was the Pennsylvania State House. It really didn't get the nickname Independence Hall until after the Constitutional Convention of 1787. But then the Constitutional Convention of 1787 wasn't the Constitutional Convention until afterwards. The guys showed up thinking that they were going to just amend the Articles of Confederation, which was not enough. And I know, and I will not go into, the last thing I want to do is talk about with a bunch of people about the Constitution. But regardless of the specific points of the Constitution, we needed a Constitution in a very desperate way. We were very susceptible to invasion, both on land and on the sea, without that recognized Constitution throughout the world at the time. But Independence Hall opened up in 1753. There is a clock tower and a bell up there. That bell's our centennial bell. We put it up there in 1876. It rings in the hour every hour. Unlike the Liberty Bell, that darn thing cracked the first time we hit it. But the Liberty Bell's in this pavilion on the left-hand side, just a little forward of us. When we turn, we're going to turn on Chestnut Street. You can try to look, but usually the glare of the sun makes it hard to see the Liberty Bell. So the first Continental Congress showed up in Philadelphia in 1774. It was the Second Continental Congress. They met here in started in 1775. Those were the guys that signed the Declaration of Independence. On each side of Independence Hall, there's a building. These buildings were built after the Revolution, and not the one we're looking at here, but the one towards the other side is the first seat of the United States Supreme Court. Also, if you get a chance to walk down Chestnut Street, there's a lot of 19th century bank buildings. Chestnut Street was very much known as Bankers Row in the early 1800s. The public buildings in Philadelphia, Independence Hall, the guilds, one of which the Carpenter's Hall is, were all built with park space around them. These parks might have looked a little different, but they were all part of the building plan in the first place. That's on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is what we call Independence Mall. The lawn that goes from Independence Hall to the left-hand side to the Constitution Center. And that was built facing Independence Hall, of course, because that's where the Constitution was drafted. Now we're going to stop at a building, a big orange building. It's called the Philadelphia Bourse. The Philadelphia Bourse was the first commodities exchange, multiple commodities exchange in the United States, opened up in 1895. It's not that any longer. This government office is upstairs. The first level, though, is a food hall. It's not a very big food hall. I'm saying that the wrong way. There's not much open in here. It wasn't just the coronavirus. It's unfortunate. It's a beautiful space. They keep it well, but it just doesn't get the business we would wish it would. We're going to stop at this stop automatically. It's not on our map, but it is on the other bus company's map. So just give us a moment, folks. We don't stop at all the stops like we're stopping here. I call out the stops. I'll be saying Betsy Ross House, stop 2. Does anyone want to get off? You have to let me know if you want to get off. So I can tell our bus driver, once again, Shakia downstairs, to please stop. So once again, everybody, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania itself was founded by William Penn, a converted Quaker, officially opened up the settlement in 1682. But during the year of 1681, William Penn brought about 1,000 people over to what would become Philadelphia to settle the city itself. William Penn believed deeply in religious liberty, and that is Pennsylvania's creed. When we start moving again on the other side of the trees, and everything's on the other side of the trees in Philadelphia, is a beautiful statue to religious liberty. This statue was part of the first World's Fair in the United States, the first international World's Fair, and that took place right here in Philadelphia in 1876 in our largest green space, which is Fairmont Park, that sits right on the west side of our art museum. Please watch your step, folks. There's one stop we stop at automatically. That's the Reading Terminal Market. So when we're going to the Reading Terminal Market, please don't get anxious. Please don't wondering why I'm not asking if you want to get off. It can take a while to get around the building, and our stop's on the other side. So once again, everybody, the city, just a rectangle, 2 miles from the Delaware River on the right-hand side to 30th Street on the left-hand side. 1 mile north and south, a half a mile on the other side of Market to the north, and a half a mile behind us to the south. Market Street, originally a high street, but they built a huge Pavilion Market as well as all kinds of mercantiles and offices along Market Street from the Front Street to 4th Street early in our history, and it changed their name to Market Street. Now, William Penn, our founder, he didn't like to name anything after people. He believed that was not humble. We're named Pennsylvania because King Charles II named the place after William Penn's father, who he had borrowed 16,000 pounds from that he couldn't pay back. William Penn, when he went to name his streets, the streets that weren't numbered, he'd name after trees. Keep in mind that our tour does stay within the original rectangle grid of the city. Philadelphia today, though, is not 2 square miles. We're 146 square miles. So we're missing quite a bit on the tour. On the right-hand side, Philadelphia's first official Jewish congregation, the Congregation Mikveh Israel, founded in 1740. You can tell by the sign. This little community center and museum here. And then this is Christ Church Burial Ground. We don't see Christ Church till the end of the tour. Christ Church, about 3.5 blocks from here. It got very crowded very quickly in Philadelphia. They were lucky to find this big of a space as close as they did to their church. Coming up on the right-hand side across the street, there's a large building, and that is the United States Mint. After the Revolution, Philadelphia was the first mint in the United States, and in 1969, when we opened this building, we became the largest mint in the world, minting the Purple Heart, the Medal of Honor, our own medal we call the Liberty Medal, as well as all kinds of coins and cash, of course. So William Penn, our founder, but it is Philadelphia, and we do think a lot about another guy, and that, of course, is Benjamin Franklin, who showed up in 1723, only 17 years old. He had been apprenticing for his brother for the last 4 years in his brother's print shop in Boston. They didn't get along. They had a huge argument. Benjamin Franklin basically quit his job, went home to tell his father and stepmother that he was out of work. His brother and he were not talking, and I think they did like my parents would have done. They'd been like, well, what are you going to do? Well, Benjamin Franklin thought about it, and he said to himself, I'm going to Philadelphia. Philadelphia, there seems to be a lot of possibilities for success there. It took Ben a little while, but by the time he was 25, he opened up his first print shop. When Benjamin Franklin started to become successful, he must have looked around at the colonies and actually said to himself, hey, there's a lot of things that they just haven't done. I better start doing things, and he did. Some examples of what Benjamin Franklin did before everyone else. He started the first volunteer fire company, encouraged the rest of the city and the towns and villages around to do the same. The first fire insurance company, the first free public school, the first free public hospital, the first lending library. Then once again, after the mint was built, as an older gentleman, the guy designed our first coin, just for a couple examples. Okay, you see a sign for the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. You'll see the bridge in a moment when we turn. The bridge opened up in 1926. They tried to call it the Delaware River Bridge because it goes over the Delaware River. We don't care. Not only do we like certain things named after Benjamin Franklin, but this is actually his neighborhood. They changed the name of the bridge in the 1950s. But Philadelphia, you got to get ready for this. We nickname things. We give two names to things in the first place. And of course, there's the Ben Franklin thing. So we just turned on Ray Street. So that's the question. If William Penn named the streets after trees, why is this Ray Street? Because people used to race horses down here, and everyone got so used to saying to each other, what's happening on the Ray Street? You win any money lately on the Ray Street? They just finally started calling it Ray Street. When we go through the light up here, to the left-hand side is a church at St. Augustine's, the founding church where, the church where the University of Villanova was founded, if you're familiar with that school. On the right-hand side, an old German Reformed church that you'd recognize denomination-wise as the United Church of Christ. There's also an old colonial Methodist church to the left-hand side, but when we go through the light, if you look that way, you'll see you can't see it because the big piece of the bridge is in the way. But it's St. George's Methodist. And folks, there'll be many places on the tour where there'll be too many things for me to mention. So folks, keep your eyes open and definitely check out architecture. There's a lot of interesting buildings, often different styles, different ages, different sizes right next to each other. That's just a good example of why standing isn't necessarily the best thing to do. I'm the one that's bruised. I know about it. I know about it. When we get up on the right-hand side above the greenish door of the dry cleaners is an old embedded street sign. The market across the street, they're also completely aware of what this street was called and I think should still be called, and that's Sassafras Street. I just like the word sassafras. Even when I'm tired and hot and it's the end of the day, I don't mind saying sassafras. I'm not going to say it again, I promise. I'm saying it in my head. Also, folks, any market like this in Philadelphia, if you're looking for a hoagie, you want to go to a regular privately owned market or restaurant. Nothing against Wawa, I go there. But if you have an option, take the option. If you've ever seen the show Sunny in Philadelphia, watch your heads back there. On the right-hand side is Patty's Pub, where the bar scenes are done. When we make a turn, we're going to make a turn up here on 2nd Street. On the left-hand side, there's a couple little alleys, and these little alleys originally were just pathways down to the Delaware River after a bunch of buildings were built that weren't supposed to be here. But you'll see a Fireman's Hall Museum. It's actually built from a 19th century fire hall. And there you get a better look at the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. It is 1.7 miles each way. If you want to take a walk or ride a bike across it, you can also get a subway-sized train, the Patco line at 8th and Market. Over on the waterfront of Camden, there's Adventure Aquarium and the Battleship New Jersey to visit. If you walk across the bridge, you're not in Camden, though, you're on the highway. So either you're going to walk further or you're going to come back. So At least take a bite. That's my suggestion. We're going to turn, but if we went right down the hill there where the Delaware River is, we've actually taken an old pier that sits right next to the Benjamin Franklin Bridge and made a park out of it. Philadelphia, we do love our parks. We're always looking for places to build new parks. So there's the Fireman's Hall Museum, and then not this alley, but the next alley is Alfred's Alley. And Alfred's Alley is the oldest continually inhabited street in the United States. On Alfred's Alley, there's 32 homes, not one of them more than 16 feet wide. Typically built, regardless of the style, one room on each floor. We call these size homes Father, Son, Holy Ghost homes. But they're almost always extended. It's hard to live in 16 square feet. The one you see here right on the left-hand side, on this side of the street, is actually longer than most of them are or were originally. You can see the ones over here on the left-hand side. They were not just 16 feet wide, they were also 16 feet deep originally. It became very, very crowded in Philadelphia, and people still wanted to live near the river where life was just much easier as far as business. Arch Street, don't look for it, it's not here anymore. This street was originally called Mulberry Street. And Betsy Ross lived on Arch Street. She was an upholsterer and a seamstress, and she would have been the perfect person to be asked to sew that first United States flag. Betsy Ross and her third husband rented a small bandbox-style home on the right-hand side. When you see the home, the rest of the building would have belonged to the landlord, and as far as space, there was no space there. That courtyard didn't happen until 1975. Anybody for stop to the Betsy Ross house, folks? Anybody? You're getting off here?
No, not getting
Nobody's scared, thanks. Now, Betsy was married 3 times. Revolution can be a little tough on her husbands. Her first husband passed away early in the Revolution, and she remarried. Her second husband was taken prisoner aboard a ship on the Atlantic Ocean, taken to England, where he died in jail. Another American in that jail was a man named John Claypool. Made it back to America, came to Philadelphia, told Betsy the bad news. It wasn't long before she was Mrs. Betsy Claypool. They had a long life together, and Betsy Ross herself lived to be 84 years old. And you could ask me, but I don't have a good answer. If her first husband was named Ross, and they were only married for a couple of years, and she had a long life with John Claypool, why is she called Betsy Ross? I don't know. So once again, the rest of the building would have belonged to the landlord, not to Betsy. Her and her husband are renting this house. She's actually working out of this house. Already accustomed to flag making, Philadelphia built a lot of ships, even British merchant ships, until the Revolution started, of course. An old bank building, the Corn Exchange on the right-hand side. And when we go through the light on the left-hand side is one of the oldest, largest Quaker meeting houses. In order to build their meeting house in the neighborhood, the only space that was available was their own burial ground. The Quakers didn't even use gravestones till the middle of the 1800s, and they built the meeting house right on top of the graveyard. It's a functioning meeting house. We have about 20,000 Quakers still in the area, but they also do tours here. And then coming up on the right-hand side is a beautiful bust of my buddy Benjamin Franklin, sitting at Engine 8. We consider this the descendant fire company of Ben's, although his volunteers met at his house just around the corner, the left-hand side off of Market Street. There's also one of our murals on the right-hand side of the statue. Philadelphia has a lot of public art. Over 1,500 public statues, more public statues than any city in the world other than Paris, France itself. There's a plaque on the hotel to the left-hand side because that's where Benjamin Franklin founded the University of Pennsylvania that was called Philadelphia College. It was originally a free school, not so free anymore. Anybody for Christ Church burial ground here on the left-hand side? Nobody. Ben's buried in the corner of the graveyard with his wife and a young son that died of smallpox when he was only 4 years old. Ben had another son, though. That was William Franklin. He was governor of New Jersey. Nothing like Ben, no sense of humor, a real stick in the mud, also a loyalist that ended up in prison in someone's home in Connecticut, where he caused a lot of trouble, instigating things around town, so they imprisoned him more harshly. Eventually he immigrated to England, but his son, William Temple Franklin, stayed right here with Ben. To the left-hand side, Independence Hall, and on the right-hand side here is anyone getting off at the Constitution Center, folks. Nobody for the Constitution Center. Of course, the Constitution drafted in 1787. That took about 4 months, another 9 months to get the darn thing ratified by all the states. The big brown building on the right-hand side is a Federal Reserve. There's 13 Federal Reserves in the United States. On the left-hand side, this is the back of Philadelphia's Federal Courthouse. Beyond the courthouse is a federal prison, which works out very conveniently when things don't work out too well for someone. Coming up on the right-hand side, though, across the street, is one of Philadelphia's African-American museums. All kinds of cool history and artwork inside this museum, but I do ask people to note the 13 bells outside, representing the first 13 states, but without any clappers, symbolizing the very sad fact that when they drafted that Constitution, there was not a voice that spoke up loud enough against slavery. Now, they're very important to Philadelphia symbolically, but they're also part of another one of our art programs. This is called the 1% for art. If you buy a piece of land or a building from the city directly, anywhere in the city, if you're going to use that space commercially or publicly, you have to put 1% of what you've already spent for artwork that's free and accessible to the public. Even when you're a museum with artwork inside it, you charge people to come into the museum, the artwork's not free and accessible. On the right-hand side used to be our police station, shaped like handcuffs, very sarcastic architect. But our police department, they moved out of here a couple weeks ago and into a building on North Broad Street, north of City Hall. That used to be our Inquirer newspaper building. On the left-hand side, the glass panels of this parking lot, part of the 1% for art program. Our oldest art program is the Philadelphia Public Art Association, and we just celebrated our 150th anniversary this year. We also have the Fairmont Park Art Association and our mural art project. So we're entering Chinatown, and you'll know by the Four Seasoned Dragons of China on the right-hand side, also known as the Dragons of Good Fortune. But if you look way up on the left-hand side, that's William Penn on top of City Hall. I mention him from here because we were never going to build a building taller than William Penn. We promised ourselves we wouldn't, but in 1987 we built that first building with the spire. It's called Liberty One. Liberty One, top of the spire is 750 feet. The William Penn statue is under 600 feet. We've built quite a few taller buildings though now. Anybody for Chinatown, folks? Nobody, Shakia, thanks. This was the first area of Philadelphia settled by Chinese people, almost exclusively men. Most of these Chinese men had been working on the railroads and the mines in the western part of the country. When we go through the light, you definitely want to look to the right-hand side to see our Friendship Gate, a gift from our sister city, Zhejiang, built in a very old traditional style without any metal hardware, no nuts, no bolts, no nails, no brackets, a lot of slits, a lot of slats, a little bit of gravity. You will keep cords, keeping things balanced, but they're attached by wooden pegs, not by metal. You'll also notice there's more restaurants down there. We're pretty serious about liking to eat in Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is a much larger city than we had been. We're 146 square miles, incorporating all that was the county of Philadelphia into the city in 1854. Please watch your step. We do have plenty of seats. It's a little warm, but we definitely have the seats. So once again, everybody, please look to the right-hand side when we go through the light. And don't worry, we know to give back in Philadelphia. We were brought up right. If you were in Zhejiang, you could go see a copy of the Liberty Bell, an exact size copy with the crack and everything. As a matter of fact, Philadelphia gave a Liberty Bell to every state of the Union in 1976 when we were celebrating the bicentennial. Pennsylvania's rather, went up to a place called Allentown. When Philadelphia, we knew we were going to be occupied by the British, the Continental Army took everything they could out of the city that might be used for warfare, like bells that could be melted down for bullets. And this was taken to the town or the city of Allentown, and that's why they got our bell. What you guys did with your bell, I don't know. You can explain yourself later if you want to. And this on the right-hand side, unfortunately it's all boarded up. This was the Trocadero. Originally it was a vaudeville burlesque house. The last thing it's been used for was a rock and roll review, and I'm really hoping someone buys up the building to use it as some sort of auditorium or club and not take down the building. It's really pretty inside. On the right-hand side is the convention center. Takes up 3.5 solid city blocks with modern buildings. The walkway in front of us takes you to the ballroom, which is actually the old Reading Terminal train shed. The convention center ballroom is 1.5 blocks long. When they built the train station in the late 1800s, those big shot train people, they figured the people that were here were going to go away. The people that were here were 2 huge outdoor markets, about 90 vendors. But they got the right from the city to stay, and they had to build a train station over the market, which is a good thing because the market's still here and the trains have been put underground. They put the trains underground in 1984 to get them out of the way of traffic. Now, the Reading Terminal Market's more of a food court than it is a farmer's market, but that's okay. It's one of the best food courts you could go to. All kinds of Philadelphia favorites like cheesesteaks and hoagies, Philadelphia roast beef, slow roasted brisket, or a pork sandwich from Nick's, Philadelphia style ice cream, Philadelphia water ice, and soft pretzels. But you could get vegan food, you could get vegetarian food. There's a salad bar. There's a place for burgers, there's a place for crepes, there's a Jewish deli, there's an Italian pizza place, there's a Southern style sit-down diner, there's a bar with bar food and beverages, there's Pearl seafood, and there's Chinese food, and there's Mexican food, and there's soul food, and there's Amish food, and there's bakeries, and there's candy stores. There's even a candy store that makes their own chocolate. Bassett's Ice Cream, the first people to sell ice cream commercially. I'm talking real fast because I want to turn and tell everyone to look down the alley, because it's Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia you just never know where you're going to see public art. So above our heads on the left-hand side is the Convention Center's ballroom, and as we pull in here at the Marriott Hotel, this is the Marriott's contribution to the 1% for art, called World Order in Perspective. Is anyone getting off here we do have people coming down. Please watch your step, folks. Okay, everybody else look up on the right-hand side, and there's William Penn on top of City Hall. What the heck is he doing up there? As a Quaker believing deeply in humility, and he was serious about this stuff. The thing is, he wasn't around when we built City Hall, so we did exactly what we wanted to do, and what we wanted to do was we wanted to put the tallest statue on any building in the world on top of our City Hall, and we wanted it to be William Penn. So it is, and we did. And he's still the tallest statue on any building in the world. At 37.5 feet, he is 4 stories tall. A little perspective, his hair is just touching his shoulder. The hair on the statue is 4.5 feet long. William Penn has some friends up there with him, 4 bronze friends below him. 2 of the people native to this area, the Lenape, also known as the Lenni Lenape, as well as 2 Swedes. There was a small settlement of Swedish people along the Delaware River when William Penn arrived in what would become Philadelphia. Some of these folks were living in what is today the state of Delaware. Good old Delaware, we still love you. They used to be part of Pennsylvania, but for decades before the Revolution, they got into the habit of calling themselves what they were, which was the 3 lower counties, and pretty much governing themselves. In 1775, they became the 13th United Colony of America. We were named so in that year by the Continental Congress. And then in 1777, they and the rest of us became the 13 United States of America. So Delaware was the last colony. Kind of funny because after the Constitution was drafted, they were the first state to sign the Constitution, so they were kind of the last and the first all at one time. And we still like Delaware. Kind of. I'm only kidding. Hey, don't feel bad about Pennsylvania. At least we knew what they were up to. They also took a bite out of Maryland. The Mason-Dixon line can be found on the Delaware River. The Mason-Dixon line has a lot of connotations we think of today, but originally it was really all about these disputes over Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Okay, so City Hall. It took 30 years to build City Hall from 1871 to 1901. On the building, there are 250 statues and large engravings in stone, not one of them the same as any of the others. Nothing symbolic about it. The sculptor Alexander Calder just wanted to make different statues. And City Hall was built in the very center square of the original rectangle city, just 1 mile from the Delaware River to the left and 1 mile to the Schuylkill River to the right-hand side. The building across the street is Lowe's Hotel, black on the bottom, gray up top, but originally the Philadelphia Savings and Fund Society Bank building. Still have the huge red neon lights on top of this building that light up in the evening. When they were put up here in 1933, they were the largest neon lights in the world. They are 3 stories tall. Not as tall as William Penn, he is 4 stories tall. But we'll see the letters from different places on the tour. It just gives you a little perspective of the old where you were, where you are. We're going to turn right, so it's a little awkward, but the front of the head house here is really a beautiful building. If you can, without hurting your neck, take a turn that way. That would be the largest rotating hard rock guitar, but for some reason it stopped rotating about a month and a half ago. I don't know what's up. I'll be perfectly honest with you. When I go home at night, all kinds of weird things go through my mind. I completely forget about this guitar. It's just the way it is. I just don't care. I don't. Okay, there it is, Philadelphia City Hall. This is the largest solid masonry building in the world. What do I mean by that? There is no skeleton, there's no steel frame. This building is built block on top of block like a second French Empire-style pyramid. But as the largest solid masonry building in the world, it is larger than any of the pyramids. Some of the blocks on the first level are up to 22 feet deep. And if you stand in the middle of the courtyard of City Hall, you can stand right on a mosaic suns, and you are in the very center of the original city, looking east and west on Market Street here and north and south on Broad Street in the other direction. The very pretty Market Street National Bank on the right-hand side, and then the Masonic Temple in front of us. The Masonic Temple opened up in 1873. They were just starting City Hall then. This is the largest Masonic Temple here in Pennsylvania. There's 2 George Washington Masonic aprons that are known about. One of them is in this building, and it was a gift from the very good friend of Washington, General Lafayette. We actually have a statue of Benjamin Franklin showing that Masonic apron to Benjamin Franklin because he was so thrilled to get it as the gift that he did. Then on the left-hand side, that's General John Reynolds, the first general to be shot and killed at Gettysburg. He was from Lancaster, PA. The other general, that's George McClellan, who was from Philadelphia. But I have a lot less interest in him. But I have no opinions. Okay, he actually ran for president against Abe Lincoln. That's a good one. On the right-hand side across the street, Young Ben and his printing press. The statue in this courtyard is called Government by the People. The game pieces are called It's Your Move, and I do not know all the names of all the pieces of public art. You can see Philadelphia's 2 tallest buildings in front of us, a little to the right-hand side, and then the spired building on the left-hand side. That is the first building, once again, built taller than William Penn. Across the street on the right-hand side, a bit in front of us, is one of Robert Indiana's love statues. This is actually Jfk Plaza, but we all call it Love Park. And when we get up there, if you look where the statue is, you'll see a street on a diagonal, the only street within the original rectangle grid of William Penn's original city that was built on a diagonal. And it opened up in 1918, just as World War I was ending. Over here on this side of City Hall on the left-hand side, there's a lot of fountains popping up to splash around in. Also in Love Park, there's a splashy fountain. We have public pools in Philadelphia, but here in Center City, where things are so tight, we mostly just have these kind of sprinkle fountains for people to get wet in. You can see the art museum in the distance. Definitely not our only art museum, not our oldest art museum. The Academy of Fine Arts behind us to the right-hand side down Broad Street opened up in 1805. The buildings on the Parkway were built after the Parkway opened in 1918, but the Art Museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, is definitely our largest art museum with more stuff than any museum I've ever seen. We do have a stop in the next block. Is anyone getting off at Love Park City Hall, folks? Anybody? Nobody, Shakia, thanks. Okay, everybody, you can see Suburban Station on the right-hand side. If you look up and see the letters that say Pennsylvania Railroad, that lettering might look familiar to you. I can give you some hints. Coming out of here, as well as our Reading Terminal Station, was the Reading Railroad, but also the Pennsylvania Railroad, the B&O Railroad, and the Short Line. If you don't get me yet, let me try this one. The Short Line is a nickname for shoreline, as in seashore line. But from this part of Philadelphia, Center City to Atlantic City, it's only an hour. Everybody called that train route the short line because it took so little time. Now either you know we're talking about Monopoly or you don't. I'll play Scrabble if you don't like Monopoly. I'll beat you though. Watch your step, folks. So we are going to go down the Parkway. You'll see a park when we turn there, and it was originally a great big square park. It was William Penn's Northwest Park, but it was renamed after James Logan before they even built the Parkway. But when they built the Parkway, they made it much smaller. They made it into a circle to accommodate traffic going by. Other museums that are on the Parkway other than the Art Museum is the Academy of Natural Sciences, the Franklin Institute, our Science Museum, the Rodan and the Barnes. Over to the right-hand side, the mural on that hotel is one of the statues on City Hall. We'll be going around City Hall later on in the tour in the other direction. The standing mural in front, on the right-hand side, in front of that brown metal building, just has a few of Philadelphia's first, and none of Ben's, just a couple though. It shows the first zoo, the first circus, the first American flag, the first steam locomotive, the first steamship, as well as the first stainless steel airplane. The flowers were the first flower show today. The Philadelphia Flower Show is the oldest, largest, most attended flower show in the world. I would love to be in that fountain right now. In order to build the Parkway, they had to take down about 3,500 buildings. And as far as that original city, that rectangle that was designed, this would be the northwest corner. On the left-hand side, a Holocaust memorial. And although you don't see many homes here on the Parkway, they took them all down, as well as all kinds of factories and stuff. The buildings built around here, and you'll see when we're riding around the neighborhood a little bit, very second industrial revolution, at least after the Civil War into the early 1900s. But one of the old buildings that are left on the Parkway is the Basilica Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul, which will be on the right-hand side in a moment. You might notice across the street from the Basilica is an Amora statue that was a gift of Robert Indiana, the love statue artist, to Philadelphia to commemorate Pope Francis' visit here in 2015. And don't even ask if we're all Catholic in Philadelphia. This is Pennsylvania. We worship as we please. We also were pleased to come look at the Pope as well. The man on the left-hand side is Thaddeus Cucusco, my favorite Polish freedom fighter. He came to America to fight for the idea of democratic free government. Even though this was not his home, he was made a citizen, though. After all, as an engineer, he helped design the forts at Saratoga, as well as Philadelphia's island fort of Mifflin. That's along the Delaware River just south of the city. This was a gift from Poland to Philadelphia in 1977. He actually came back to visit us here in Philadelphia while John Adams was president, spent about 8 months here, so not only is he a big hero to America, he's kind of special to Philadelphia because he hung out with us. He and his compatriots had hoped to win independence from Russia after the revolution. They were not successful. He was injured and exiled. Might mention, though, that Poland with Lithuania together was the first place other than America to draft a national constitution after the American one. Anybody for stop 8 for the Basilica, the Academy of Natural Sciences, the Free Library of Philadelphia? Anybody? Nobody, Shakia, thanks. So not only was this a different park once upon a time, but this was actually Philadelphia's gallows. This is where we hung our prisoners at the Northwest Park. But in 1829, the same year they opened Eastern State, the mostly Quakers still running the city decided that was not very wholesome public entertainment, and we had our last public hanging. So when you think about Benjamin Franklin and our Science Museum, he actually left Philadelphia, as well as Boston, a legacy of money for education. Philadelphia, we spent ours a lot faster, and we used the last of it to help build the Franklin Institute itself. Now, Benjamin Franklin, he was the real thing. It wasn't just that he liked electricity and everybody liked Ben, so they gave him honorary degrees. He actually, for example, came up with the idea of the positive and negative and the fact that energy runs between the two. So there was all kinds of exhibits in here. It's a huge museum, very hands-on, very interactive. The home of the first planetarium in the United States, Fell's Planetarium. We've added an IMAX theater. There's a human heart so large you can walk through, and you can even learn to ride a surfboard in this place. I don't know what they're doing. It feels like you're surfing on air. You're not, but it feels that way. The pillars in front of us commemorate sailors and soldiers of the American Civil War. And on the right-hand side, please, folks that are in the back, please watch your heads on the trees as we pull up here. The building on the other side of the trees is the Barnes Foundation, a beautiful modern museum filled with impressionistic and modern art. all a private collection originally of a man named Dr. Barnes, who became very wealthy when he and another doctor found a cure for infantile blindness. He spent the rest of his life hanging out with some of the big wigs, collecting artwork. And if you like Renoir, you should have known Dr. Barnes. There's 160 Renoirs in here. I know. You feel kind of guilty when you walk into the gallery and you actually go, oh, another Renoir. It's cool though. There is a lot of artwork in here, and the museum is beautiful as well. Because it was a private collection acquired about 15 years ago, we have a number, and the number at that time was almost $35 billion. There are no other museums, large or small, I can give you any sort of price like that on. A lot of artwork collected at different times from different places. Anybody for the Rodan Museum? That's the very next block, folks. Anybody? Nobody for the Rodan? Shakir, thanks. If you look at the doors of the Rodan Museum, the solid bronze doors, they are Rodin's depiction of Dante's Gates of Hell from Dante's Inferno. The thinker is a small statue that sits on top of the Gates of Hell. Rodin liked the statue very much and did 5 large-scale casts of it. Couple truths I have to tell you here, though. One, he never saw the Gates of Hell cast in bronze. He never saw his artwork like that. He didn't have the money. He'd only seen the Gates of Hell cast in plaster. The other thing is, that thinker statue here in Philadelphia was cast after Rodin's death. That's not uncommon. It's an official cast, but I just like to tell people the truth. Once again, it's not the gates behind the statue, but the solid bronze doors that are the gates of hell. And people like to come here to have weddings. They like to have their wedding pictures taken in front of the gates of hell. I don't know why. I know we can't see from here. It is not bunny rabbits and leaping ponies on those doors. But we actually have the largest collection of Rodin statues outside of Paris, France itself, and that was Rodin's home. So we do like our parks. We have about 9,000 acres of park in Philadelphia. You might notice that we have parks right next to our promenade, which is the Parkway itself, just for example, that we do like our parks. The largest park is Fairmont Park that sits on the west-hand side of the Art Museum. That's about 3,000 acres apart. It's where the World's Fair was in 1876. It's also where the Philadelphia Zoo, the oldest zoo in America, is. That opened in 1873. Okay, so we're going up to Eastern State Penitentiary, the first prison designed and built under the Pennsylvania system, designed by the Quakers here in Philadelphia. Meant to be a more humane prison system in a lot of ways. It was. You weren't thrown into a room with a bunch of other prisoners. Each prisoner had their own cell. They had an outdoor area. They were given about an hour in every day. They were given decent clothing, decent food. They were taught occupations. But the Quakers had misled themselves in a couple ways in their own beliefs. And I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to interrupt myself first. On the left-hand side, the Parkway House, a more modern building designed by Elizabeth Fleischer in the 1950s, designed so that each apartment would get the same amount of sunlight at some point during the day, regardless of size or shape. Of course, the Whole Foods on the other side kind of ruined that when they decided they really had to have this condominium here. I have no opinion. Okay, so back to Eastern State Penitentiary. Quakers believe that everybody's good inside, and I hope that's true. They also believe people should take time to think and reflect seriously. Sounds right to me. They put these two ideas together, and they figured that if they gave everybody 24 hours a day solitary confinement, people would naturally have time to think about it all. They would naturally feel bad about their crimes, and they would repent. There you get the name penitentiary. Of course, it wasn't long before it was known as the Maniac Maker here in Philadelphia. But this prison system was copied throughout the world more than 400 times. Another prison here in Philadelphia called Moyamensing Prison opened less than 10 years later. But they meant, well, it definitely was more humane as far as the way they kept the prisoners, kept them safe from each other. Also, in 1829, before the White House, certainly before any of my family running around, they had indoor plumbing, running water flush toilets. The entire prison was heated by steam from the floor up. But it's a block and a half of fortress wall on all sides, built to be intimidating, but it wasn't for a neighborhood. The neighborhood wasn't here. The neighborhood grew up around the prison. That's helpful. On the left-hand side, this mansion belonged to the Bergdahls. It's an apartment house today, but the Bergdahls were very wealthy brewers here in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, we were a big bit of the Industrial Revolution. We were actually known as the workshop of the world. The huge Baldwin train engine company, Mr. Stetson's hat factory, dairies, sugar refineries, candy companies, food packaging and distribution, medical supplies, medicines, chemicals. We were pretty active. And a lot of breweries. Also a lot of baseball clubs. Okay, so this is what I asked. Who's going to jail? Anyone up front for jail? Back here, anybody? You're going to jail? Okay, well, we have to go around the turn and let you off. The entrance is on this side. Probably let you out there later, too. I'm not really sure about that part, though, but the entrance is on this side. It is a block and a half on all sides. It's a nice neighborhood if you want to walk around, but you might not want to do that. If you prefer, you can come back to Philadelphia in October when they do Tour Behind the Walls. And Eastern State became part of the more modern New York State system in the early 1900s, remained a prison until 1971. Then it sat around growing trees for 20 years. Please watch your step, jailbirds. Sorry.
Halloween show in there?
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about and about to talk about again.
It is open inside for tours.
Yes, it is open.
Thanks.
They do Terror Behind the Walls. They take a prison that a lot of people already think's haunted, make it even scarier. I don't really go into believing haunted things too much, but when you go in here, it has got that weird, awesome feeling. But for the Terror Behind the Walls, they actually hire 150 people, and I've gone once, I'm never going again, and all I can say about ghosts is I've never seen a ghost, but I would rather see a couple ghosts than those 150 people jumping out at me again. A bunch of people jump out at you, and you turn around all scared, and there's even more on the other side. And when I say people, of course, they're dressed up like all kinds of creatures. But the most famous prisoner that was ever here was probably Al Capone, who was here, most people believe, just hiding out after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And why do things look so much more appealing when you can't get them? So the Philadelphia Museum of Art was built on top of the old Philadelphia Reservoir. The reservoir closed down in 1909. The reservoir was on a hill called Fairmont. The neighborhood's called Fairmont. When they built the Parkway, they tried to name it the Fairmont Parkway. It's the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. So the art museum's on a hill. On the right-hand side is Fairmont Park, 3,000 acres of green space that exists because Philadelphia bought all the land in a very expansive way in order to protect the reservoir back in the day. The only buildings there is the Philadelphia Zoo, one building that was built permanently during the World's Fair. It had been the art gallery, is now a children's museum. It's called Memorial Hall as far as the building. There are some old mansions. And there's the boathouses right near the art museum for the regattas we have on the Schuylkill. But otherwise, it's all green space. So that's 3,000 acres of green space. Right next to it is the Wissahickon Creek Park. The Wissahickon Creek Park is 1,900 acres. So we actually have 4,900 acres of green space right here next to Center City. If you walk up around the art museum on this side, the right side, or it is the west side, there's Victorian gazebos looking down on the old Waterworks buildings. The art museum has a beautiful azalea garden in bloom right now, as well as a picnic area. But then after that is Fairmont Park itself. The building on the right-hand side is an annex building for the art museum. It used to be an insurance company. Beautiful building. It looks more impressive. You get a better idea of what this building's designed like if you wait until we go by it a little bit and look back at it. Not that you shouldn't look at it for any reason now. But the Philadelphia Museum of Art is packed. It has loads of things in storage, even with this annex building, even with adding an extension as well as an auditorium and more gallery underneath the building in the old reservoir itself. See the dogs of fidelity on each side of the doors.
Oh yeah, look at the dog statue. You see it? At the doorway underneath the
Because the Philadelphia Museum of Art's made out of a beautiful dolomite stone. This stone came from Minnesota. It's not the only place in the world you have this type of stone, though. But you can see the stained granite walls of the reservoir underneath the art museum itself. The statue over there is an Armenian folk hero called Myrrh. And then everybody knows when you see a golden woman on a horse, that's a statue. It's almost always Joan of Arc, and this most certainly is. So the Philadelphia Museum of Art is a huge museum. One of the largest museum buildings in the country. Nevertheless, we don't have a space for everything. The Rocky statue was left on top of the art museum steps after the third Rocky movie. It was not invited by anyone in Philadelphia to stay. When the president of the art museum was told it was still standing out there, he called the city, asked the city to take it away, and they did. They finally decided they'd take it down to where all our stadiums are on the south end of Broad Street. But when they realized people were going to go down there just to have their picture taken with the statue, when there was no game, no concert, nothing's going on down there, they were afraid they were losing customers, so they asked the city to bring it back. but he's not standing on the steps. He'll be right on the right-hand side as we make this turn. Across from the Art Museum is a huge memorial, a huge George Washington memorial of bronze and stone. If you look at this memorial, it used to sit in Fairmont Park. They took it apart, toted it over here, and they put it back together, which I find kind of impressive. There's the Rocky statue. All these rocks, the steps behind the Rocky statue, all part of the old reservoir, folks. So do we have anyone getting off at the Art Museum? Okay, our stop is on the other side of the light. Please just wait till we make a complete stop over there.
19.
I don't know what stop that is. It's not our map, and I don't have my glasses on.
Okay, it is on Market Street at 18th.
Okay.
Okay.
There's not an American street, but I think I know what you mean. Well, there is an American street in a different part of the city. Please watch your step, folks. They had a huge event here. They were selling antiques. I've never seen them just selling anything at the Art Museum before. I'm not sure what that was about, but they are in the middle of taking that down. These are the 72 steps everybody calls the Rocky Steps. Keep in mind, though, the Art Museum did open in 1928, though, a little bit before the Rocky movie. But there's a huge round fountain on top of the steps that's not running, as well as 5 fountains on each side of the Art Museum steps. Hopefully when they take this tent down up there. Let me sit where my stuff is. So on the other side of the Art Museum is the Schuylkill River. Schuylkill, a very old Dutch word. The Schuylkill River was named by the Swedish settlers here before William Penn. And it means hidden river, hidden creek. Don't look it up, though. It's not even used in the Netherlands anymore. But a nice young man from Holland Googled it up for me and said that it is indeed once was a Dutch word. But it means hidden river or hidden creek. There was so much overgrowth they couldn't find it. We don't see it here simply because we're on top of the big flat hill. If you're familiar with the University of Pennsylvania or Drexel University, on the other side of the Schuylkill River in front of us, actually then on the other side of the train tracks, on the other side of the highway, on the other side of more train tracks, on the other side of Market Street is University City, the campus for Drexel and the University of Pennsylvania. If you look over to the left-hand side, you can see there's 2 tall buildings. They're both owned by the Comcast Cable Company. They're Philadelphia's tallest buildings, 1,000 feet, and the one closer to us is 1,100 feet at the top of what's supposed to be the antenna for what is supposed to look like an old-fashioned cell phone. I don't know about that, though. But that's 1,100 feet. Now, Philadelphia, with these 2 buildings, we have the 8th and 9th tallest buildings in the country, and that is a city that had promised ourselves originally we'd never build anything taller than William Penn. Please keep in mind, folks, getting on the bus, that we do require you to be seated on the bus. For the bus to move, the children as well as adults must be seated, please. You have to sit down. They have to sit down for us to go. Well, I know that. It is terribly hot. That I can only apologize for. Please watch your step. You might get a little more air if you stay back here. With the Once again, folks, I know I talked about it earlier. All I can do is apologize for the hood on this bus. When I saw this, I wanted to walk home. I was going to say I wanted to cry, but if I had walked home, I wouldn't have been crying. So we do close down the Parkway for all kinds of events. Huge carnivals, giant picnics. Once again, folks, we need everyone to sit down in order for the bus to move. The only hope of any air would be the bus moving, and if we can't get you guys to sit down, the bus can't go. Do you understand what I'm saying? That we can't go if he's going to stand up. But we have all kinds of events on the Parkway. When we close down the Parkway, it causes all kinds of traffic problems, but we do it anyway. Another traffic problem we have in Philadelphia, of course, is the fact that we have City Hall right in the middle of the business area of our city.
We've got to pass it.
We could still get back.
Yeah. If we just keep going down Chestnut. That's fine.
Okay. Now, if we went into Fairmont Park on the other side of the Art Museum and we got on the trail along the Schuylkill River, we could go west 26 miles along the trail and we'd be right in Valley Forge where the Continental Army spent the winter of 77 into 78 while the British occupied Philadelphia. But if we wanted to, we also, at this next light, we could get off and go down a set of steps there that'll take you on a Schuylkill River trail that doesn't go into Fairmont Park at all, but rather back into Center City, Philadelphia, take you underneath 30th and Market Street. Once again, Philadelphia, we do love our parks, and we're always looking for places to build new parks, and this is a newer park in Philadelphia, the Schuylkill River Trail. Sorry. And folks in the back on the right-hand side, in a moment or two, please watch your heads on the trees coming up. So once again, on the right-hand side, that's a new park back there, but I have to tell you, as a kid growing up in Philadelphia, there might not have been a park along the Schuylkill River, but there was always a Schuylkill River, and there were always woods next to the park, and us kids knew about it. They just didn't put a trail in there for us, just our own trail. But it's beautiful now. They actually built a pier that goes out into the river just for people to hang out on. Our own bus company, if you go down the Schuylkill River, we actually, before it goes, it meanders a lot, you actually get to where our garages are down there. It would be kind of cool if we could have a tour boat going on, or maybe just a party boat. If you want to come to Philadelphia for the 4th of July, I definitely suggest you come about 9 days early because we celebrate the 4th of July for 9 days before the 4th of July just to make sure we're ready. We have different nights of fireworks on the Delaware River, concerts and movies in our parks all over the city. We do the Rocky movie right here on the steps. We have a day when we give away free tasty cakes. We have a day when we give away free ice cream, but the best day is free hoagie day. Right on the lawn outside of the visitor center, they have tables set up all over giving away turkey hoagies and Italian hoagies, potato chips, Wooders, iced teas, and lemonades, all for free. But eventually the 4th of July does come after we have a concert the night before. Watch your heads, folks. After we have a concert the night before, the Philadelphia Pops play at Independence Hall. On the 4th of July, we have a big parade on Chestnut Street, just like they did after the Constitution was ratified. That the 1st July 4th, and it said that Philadelphia's parade was the biggest. Well, I guess it should have been those crazy revolutionaries actually toted up boats from the Delaware River for the parade, put them on wheels. We don't go that far anymore. But after the parade, we all come out to the Parkway, unless you've gone to the shore. They close down the Parkway from noon till midnight. There's music and entertainment all day long. Another parade here on the Parkway early in the evening. Famous performers, and then the Philadelphia Pops play again before they put the fireworks off. Usually about 11 o'clock. If you look it up, it's going to tell you 9:30. It's not going to happen at 9:30. I promise you, it's not going to happen at 9:30. I'm not going to. Okay, all the flags on the Parkway belong to the peoples of Philadelphia, and if you move to Philadelphia and you don't see the flag, or maybe the many flags you were hoping to see, contact the city government. As soon as enough people living in Philadelphia put a claim on a place, we put your flag up. There are almost 200 flags up here right now, and the last time we put flags up was way back in 2010 when we put 19 new flags up. They're mostly in alphabetical order, so we can't do one at a time. Everything gets moved around. It takes quite a bit of time. On the right-hand side, next to the Franklin Institute, is a statue of Miranda. He was down with Galvez during the American Revolution in New Orleans, keeping the British out of New Orleans. The plane that you'll see on the right-hand side was named a Pioneer by the Budd Company, who built it here in Philadelphia. This was the first stainless steel airplane. Then once again, this is the Franklin Institute with our free library building and its twin next to it. The free library and the twin building, they were copied right out of Paris, France. And then as we turn from the Franklin Institute, across the street from the Franklin Institute is a golden globe of the constellations, a memorial to fallen pilots from World War I. Anybody for the Franklin Institute, folks? Nobody for the Science Museum? So we're going back into Center City, and Center City is what we usually call what other people would call downtown, reflecting not just City Hall itself, but the fact that there was a large center square of the city design in the first place. On the left-hand side, Moore College of Art, the first college of art specifically for women in the United States. The institution opened up in 1854. Not this light, but the next light is the street the two Comcast buildings are on. You'll also see another one of Philadelphia's murals on the left-hand side. And the hill we're going to go up in front of us is actually a bridge over the tracks that bring our commuter trains from the west side of Center City to Reading Terminal Market Station, as well as to the suburban station. The Philadelphia trains also leave Center City on the northeast side near the Delaware River, and there's about 36 different lines going all over the city, to the suburbs, some well into the countryside. And I mentioned before, Philadelphia, we're 146 square miles. We definitely have other areas that there's business, even high-rises and skyscrapers, but Center City is where the largest, tightest amount of our businesses are. Here's one of our trains coming down from Reading Terminal right now, from 30th Street Station. Also, folks, keep in mind, when you look at 30th Street Station, to the right-hand side, 30th Street was the west end of the original city. Once again, the city just went from the Delaware River to 30th Street originally, just 2 miles east and west, 1 mile north and south. Market Street, the center of the city, going east and west, and we're back to Market Street here. We're going to make a turn. This is the west side of City Hall, but we'll be heading east. A lot of shops, a lot of food in this area. A block past Market Street is Chestnut Street and then Walnut Street. Very eclectic, everything from dollar stores to very high-end shopping, the same thing with restaurants. We do have people that want to get off at the Red Stops bus stop here at the Wawa, please, Shakia. Or you wanted to get off at, no, they want to get off at the next stop at 18. Hold on a second, I'm coming down. You know where I mean, Shakia? No, before. Yeah, thank you. All right, folks that are getting off, just give us a moment. We got to get to the next block. If you look way up on the right-hand side in a moment, you'll see the spire. This building is Liberty One, also known as Liberty Place. Once again, this was the first building we built taller than the William Penn statue. The top of the spire is 750 feet. The William Penn statue stands under 600 feet. Please watch your step, folks. Please watch your step. Thank you, guys. When we go through the light, if you look to the left-hand side, there's an old Presbyterian church that sits between the two Comcast buildings 1 block over. I like to point it out just because I'm happy that the old building remained after they built the two Comcast buildings. But I'm also going to ask you to look on the other side of the building. When you look on the other side of the Mellon Bank skyscraper here, you'll see the first Comcast building like a giant mirror. Reflected into the Comcast building, you will see Liberty One, which is diagonal from that building across the street. I know. Trust me, I know. That's hot. We don't go there. This is a different bus route. That's why it's red. That's not us. Anybody for stop 18 here on West Market Street, folks? Nobody, Shakia, thanks. So here's City Hall again. I mentioned earlier, this side of City Hall has a great big plaza. We have a roller skating rink going on right now. Some of the singing fountains are running. In a month or so, they'll take down the roller skating rink and have nothing but the singing fountains, 150 spouts just to splash around it. In the wintertime, we have a roller skating rink here. And a half a generation from now, they'll probably be doing something different. So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see what has got to be the biggest clothespin you've ever seen in your life. There's an artist named Claus Ogensberg, likes to take little things from the house and make them really big. And in this case, he did a pretty good job. It's a pretty big clothespin. We're going to end up on South Broad Street. Broad Street, originally just 1 mile long, is now 14 miles long. It never turns, never bends. And when we go around City Hall here, on the left-hand side, there'll be a statue of a man named Octavius Cato. No matter how many times I tell his story can never have a happy ending, unfortunately. But Octavius Cato was a 19th century civil rights activist. He helped integrate our horse and trolley cars. He was one of the founders and a professor at Cheney University, not far from Philadelphia. He was a major in the Union Army, helped Frederick Douglass recruit for the Union Army. He was part of Philadelphia's Union League. He was also the captain of the Phoenix, Philadelphia's first professional black baseball team. Sadly and unfortunately, though, this man was assassinated on Election Day in 1871 after he had voted. He and his fiancée were out encouraging people to vote, or men to vote, I might say, when he was given the heads up that someone was out looking for him. It sounds like I just make this stuff up. He was 3 doors away from his home at 812 South Street when he was assassinated, right in front of his fiancée. It's a very sad story. He's a very interesting man, though. He's definitely worth a Google, at least. On the right-hand side, the other side of this building is older. It looks like the Parthenon. Although it's the Ritz-Carlton Hotel today, it was originally the Stephen Girard Trust Bank. And Stephen Girard was the richest man in the United States when he passed away in 1831. Now, Broad Street, like I said, never turns, never bends, but most of Broad Street's on the other side of City Hall, going north. Here, coming up on the right-hand side, is the Union League of Philadelphia, founded in 1862. The building not completed until 1865. They had hoped to have Abraham Lincoln here to inaugurate the building, but he was assassinated less than a week and a half before the date for the building to be opened and celebrated. Anybody for the Bellevue Hotel, folks? Stop 19. Nobody for the Bellevue. On the left-hand side, that used to be the Ritz-Carlton Hotel until they moved into the bank building. And here on the left-hand side, if you've ever seen the old movie Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, this is where Dan Aykroyd and the old guys had their offices. And then the Bellevue Stratford on the right-hand side, a very old hotel, the go-to places for a lot of famous people, movie stars, presidents. But once a man named Bram Stoker stayed here and claimed to be inspired by the black capes of the men going to the opera house, inspired to write the book Dracula. Hot. I smell food again. So the Black Cape Men were going to the American Academy of Music, which is coming up on the right-hand side. Anybody for the Doubletree Hotel, Broad and Locust Street, folks? Stop 2020. No one's scared. The Academy of Music is the oldest continually operating opera house in the United States, opened in 1857. They definitely closed down during the coronavirus. They did the best they could as far as it being an institution to keep up with their friends, so to speak, on social media. The building is open. They're just actually working on the overhang there. So if you got a good neck, if you look behind us at City Hall, when you look at City Hall here on Broad Street, the tower is right in the center. The tower is actually on the north side, and they make the courtyard the very center of the building. That's why you don't see it like that on Market Street. Here on the right-hand side is Philadelphia's Orchestra Hall. The Kimmel Center opened up in 2005. A huge orchestra hall shaped like a cello, as well as a smaller theater inside. The walls, the big glass dome, in no way touch the inside theaters. Keeps all the street sounds outside of the building. So we're going to go east towards the Delaware River, but if we continue down Broad Street to the south side, and shortly we'll be at Patterson Avenue, where all the stadiums are for the Phillies, Sixers, Flyers, and the Eagles. While the Union, you got to go a little further south to see our soccer team. They're in a place called Chester, right next to the Delaware as well, just south of Philadelphia. But we're going to head east. And I don't know, when we were up at Eastern State Penitentiary, the homes around there were built in the later 1800s, early 1900s. As far as the city being dense and populated and all filled with row homes one after another, you'll see different ages of buildings, definitely colonial, revolutionary, and more modern ones. But by 1840, most of the buildings here around the first mile-long block, around the first mile on either side of Broad Street were very heavily filled in. And watch your heads, folks, lots of trees on Pine Street. This is a very busy neighborhood in Philadelphia, lots of different peoples. This area is actually the neighborhood, but in Philadelphia, life's a little funny. You don't get to have your own neighborhood here. You got to share it with everyone else. It's also a neighborhood where there's a lot of college students, a lot of people from our businesses, not that they couldn't be gay, as well as people that work and go to school at Jefferson and Pennsylvania Hospital. Jefferson Hospital has about 26 buildings, some of them humongous. Pennsylvania, a little smaller complex, about 13 buildings, as well as people whose families lived around here for generations. What I mean to say is there's a lot of people here. It may just look like a plain old little street, but when you see all the shops manage to do pretty good business with the population around here. Once again, including all the people from the hospital. Some of these people don't even live here, but they're around to buy stuff. Giovanni's Reading Room on the left-hand side, one of the first legally run LGBT bookstores in the United States. That opened in 1973. The antique stores had been here on Pine Street since back in the 1920s, the late 1920s. But in the 1990s, a lot of the antique stores closed. One of the reasons why I like to mention that this neighborhood still is good for business. Most of the stores on Pine Street here don't even sell you anything you particularly absolutely need, but they still manage to do good business. Now, early on the tour, I mentioned that we will stay within the rectangle grid. Watch your heads up here. If we walk down 11th Street to the left-hand side a few blocks, we'd be right down at Market Street, right across from the Reading Terminal Market. When we were going by there, originally we were heading west, and now we're heading east. Anybody for stop 21, 10th and Pine, folks? Nobody shook hands, thanks. Okay, everybody, this is a little complicated. We're at 10th Street. 2 blocks from here is 8th Street. From Front Street, please sit down. From Front Street to 8th Street is a very tiny neighborhood called Society Hill, named after the Society of Free Traders. It just goes 3 blocks to the left-hand side when you're back at Independence National Park. The interesting thing about this neighborhood is that there are more early American buildings in such a small confined space, or not confined, but such a small closed space than anywhere else in the city or the country for that matter. The reason for that is because the neighborhood, early in our history, by the middle of the 1800s, a lot of people had moved out of here. It was very crowded. Things were getting kind of shabby. By 1900s, it was super shabby. By the 1950s, it was boarded up. I'm going to interrupt my conversation now. On the left-hand side is Pennsylvania Hospital, the first public hospital for relief of the poor, founded by Dr. Thomas Bond, Dr. Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration, as well as the go-to guy in Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin. It opened up in 1755. If you didn't have money, you didn't have to pay. If you did have money, you had to pay, but they'd still sell tickets to see your operation. Your operation would have to happen between 11 and 2 on a very sunny day, so the sun would be shining through the skylight. They were doing a new thing back then. They didn't want you to be awake. They didn't want to hold patients down. They encouraged people to smoke opium or to drink whiskey in order to become passed out. A lot of people wouldn't want to do that, and if you didn't want to do that, they would simply hit you in the head with a mallet. The only problem with the mallet is that if you woke up after being hit with a mallet, they can't hit you with the mallet again, coma or worse, leading me to point out that if you're going to hit someone with a mallet on the head, you can only do it once, or at least that's my advice. But hey, the surgery would have to be over by 2 o'clock anyway. And all kidding aside, most surgeries back then, and they were trying to be quick, would be about 15 minutes if they could be. Okay, so back to this neighborhood society hill, named after the Society of Free Traders, a trade guild from England. Some of the people that William Penn brought over here during the year previous to the official settling of Pennsylvania in 1681. By the 1950s, it was all boarded up. No one was really living here. In the 1960s, the city of Philadelphia had itself all worked up, wondering what they were going to do. This neighborhood sits right next to Independence National Park. We were going to have so many people come visit us for the bicentennial decade. We didn't want them to see this neighborhood. But the city had no money. But Ed Bacon, our city planner, Kevin Bacon's dad, he came up with the idea. He said, why don't we sell the buildings as cheap as possible with the qualification that they be fixed up on the outside by 1970. It was a great idea. It worked, and it cost Philadelphia nothing. And still today, if you have a home in this tiny neighborhood, you're not allowed to do anything to make it look early American. If it's not, you're not allowed to build a replica. Once again, it's a very tiny neighborhood. You can build, you can build a fake colonial or early American building anywhere you want else in the city, next to whoever you want to. We're going to be going by Old Pine Street Presbyterian Church on the right-hand side. We actually call it Church of the Patriots because there's so many Revolutionary soldiers buried here. And also the congregation, as well as the minister, Reverend Duffield, at the time of the Revolution, were known to be very outspoken in their patriotism, even when the British occupied the city. When the British occupied the city, the officers came into the city proper, took over our homes, delegated us to back rooms, to attics, to the basements. They stole our horses, and then they started doing things like using this church as a stable. They actually burned pews for firewood. They were kind of destructive to a lot of the buildings in Philadelphia. That's Reverend Duffield carved out of a tree. About 25% of Philadelphians were able to leave the city before the occupation. Philadelphia was considered a very patriotic place compared to some places. We had less loyalists than some people's. But we had our loyalists. After all, Philadelphia was home to Benedict Arnold's in-laws, the Shippards. Now this is St. Peter's Church, the sister church of Christ Church. They would still have officially been and certainly considered by the British officers to be the Church of England or the Anglican Church. These buildings were not damaged. On the left-hand side, the smallest national monument in the United States is a rooming house where Thaddeus Cucusco, that Polish freedom fighter I mentioned earlier, lived while he was here visiting Philadelphia in the 1790s while John Adams was president. And when we go down this street, particularly if you look in both directions, you'll see there's really a lot of old buildings around. It's not just Pine Street. Next stop coming up, folks, is for South Street. Anybody for restaurants, for shops? South Street? Nobody, Shakia, thanks. Coming up on the right-hand side, there's a Pavilion Market. It opened up in 1745. It was called New Market Head House Square. There were a couple block-long Pavilion Markets in Philadelphia and a huge street market down the middle of Market Street from Front to Fourth. The head house would have been used for a fire station downstairs and a meeting room upstairs. So we're right along the Delaware River. South Street would have been the south end of the original city, but if we were walking around at the time of the Revolution, we could have walked right past South Street, and it wouldn't have looked any different than on this side of South Street. And the same thing would have been the case on the north side close to the Delaware River. This is where everybody wanted to live. Now, there's no buildings across the street on Front Street, and it's up a hill because they built the Highway 95, and to do that, they took all the buildings off and cut the hill down on a straight angle and dug it all out. The masted ship is the Mooshaloo, which is a restaurant on the Delaware River. That was in the second Godfather movie. But originally a it's originally a German ship built in Scotland called the Kurt. Used to take metal around all over the world. Anybody for the Vietnam War Memorial, folks? We do have people getting off at the Vietnam War Memorial. Philadelphia has some very sad statistics. the most students from alumni from any public school. 64 students from Thomas Edison High School died. And then just a sad coincidence, 2 private schools each had 27 casualties. And that just happens to tie for the most from any private school. Just a sad coincidence. Please watch your step, folks. So when we're looking at the Vietnam War Memorial, it's not on land at all. We're actually on top of the bridge that is on top of the Highway 95. Thank you very much, folks. Please watch your step. Thank you. I know everyone's hot. I'm feeling really bad. So the Delaware River is the entire border between Pennsylvania and New Jersey to the right-hand side. If we floated down the river, we'd eventually go past Delaware into the Atlantic Ocean. And then the Delaware River starts way up to the northeast side in New York State. The river's flowing north right here, but it quickly goes to the northeast if we were going up the river on the left-hand side. The yellow stacked ship over there, that's the Olympia, the flagship of Admiral Dewey during the Spanish-American War, a transport ship in World War I. Last November, it celebrated the 100th anniversary of a special job it was given. It was sent back to France to pick up the unknown soldier, the official unknown soldier, who would be the first unknown soldier buried in Arlington's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. We still have shipping and industry on the river, but they took down all the commercial piers in this 1.5 mile area that we call Head's Landing, which is a park on the river. On the other side of the Hilton Hotel, we have a Seaport Museum. And then the left-hand side, those 3 apartment buildings named after the Neighborhood Society Hill Towers were designed by the architect I.M. Pei. And I.M. Pei designed the pyramid outside of the Louvre, as well as Cleveland's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The brick and stone building a little more forward on the left-hand side, that is our customs house. Once again, we still have shipping and industry on the river. That customs house built in the 1930s, but it is used today. And Dock Street here, as far as looking to the left-hand side and saying that all Front Street was a hill, the hill came down on the lower level here. A lot of buildings actually where the highway is on the other side of the street. But shipping came and went from here. And actually that was going on until they started building the apartments in the late 1950s. Dock Street goes around into a circle, and the street there was full of warehouses, a lot of wholesale marketing going on until the end of the 50s. Is anyone planning to get off here at stop 24, folks? This is going to be really crunchy. You probably can't hear me. No one's getting off. To the left-hand side, there's a Marine Corps emblem statue, and that is a memorial to the lost Marines. I believe it was 184 Marines that were lost in Beirut, Lebanon in the 1980s. At the end of this park is our Korean War Memorial. I told you it was especially lumpy. So you have to imagine Front Street at the time of the Revolution. There would have been homes, there would have been taverns, there would have been public buildings, there would have been custom offices dealing with the river port, the Delaware River port, the largest, most active port in the country. And there was one tavern that's very important to Philadelphia, even though it's not here anymore, and that's Tun Tavern. Tun Tavern important because it's the first place there was recruitment for the United States Marines. The Continental Congress in 1775 recruited a young innkeeper named Samuel Nichols, and they put him in charge of recruitment at Tun Tavern. Unfortunately, Tun Tavern burned to the ground in 1781 before the Revolution was over. They estimate that it sat about here where these steps are on the right-hand side. It actually opened in 1693, but once again it burned down so long ago they're not quite sure where it was. But Tun Tavern was also home to a restaurant called Peggy Mullen's Red Hot Beefsteak Club. And I've been thinking lately, you know, sandwiches became popular in the middle of the 1700s. A Red Hot Beefsteak restaurant I'm not so sure the guys that are all arguing about who makes the first cheesesteak. Please do not get up. It's very dangerous, especially at these steps. So what I was thinking is Peggy Malone might have been making cheesesteaks before these guys decided they were making cheesesteaks for the first. I don't know. I just was thinking that. Might not be true, but it did occur to me. On the right-hand side, a very somber memorial to Irish immigration during the Irish potato famine when more than 1 million people died of starvation in Ireland. And over on the right-hand side, the battleship New Jersey, the most decorated battleship in the United States. Commissioned in 1943, remaining in service till 1991. Up here's the great plaza. We have concerts and movies and food festivals, beer, ice cream festivals. The roller skating rink in the wintertime is an ice skating rink. And that is one of Philadelphia's own carousels. And yes, it's a double-decker, and yes, Philadelphia thinks they're cool. The good old Benjamin Franklin Bridge again, 1.7 miles each way. I wanted to Google up and find out how wide the river was here, but I forgot what I was Googling up, and the only thing I came away with was the fact that the bridge weighs 227,000 tons. The rocks in my head kick around once in a while. The steeple on the right-hand side is the steeple of Christ Church, and that was the tallest building in the colonies when the steeple was put up there in the 1730s. On the left-hand side, there's a beautiful statue that's hard to see of a man named Tammany, also known as Tammany. This was the Lenape chief that William Penn, our founder, made all the treaties with, and it is a beautiful statue, in my opinion. Coming down Market Street here, and as we come on Market Street, even though this is a neighborhood, we live around here. It's called Old City. This is also Independence National Park. We live right on top of our stuff. So if you come out to any of these restaurants or the bars, you're as likely to meet visitors as you are people that live in Philadelphia. Very low-key, cool place to hang out. Great place for a cheesesteak is Sonny's Cheesesteaks, just down the street. Anybody for this stop? Stop 26, Christ Church, the restaurants? Nobody, Shakita, thanks. They do tours of Christ Church, but this is a functioning Episcopal church today. So there's lots of cool places to hang out here, restaurants of different types. There's not too many colonial buildings left. In the early 1800s, they started taking a lot down and building larger buildings for mercantiles. But in this next block on the left-hand side, there's a series of old buildings in front of a courtyard. That courtyard used to house Benjamin Franklin's home as well as a couple other homes. Unfortunately, none of the homes are back there anymore. These first two old buildings in the front there is a post office. That is a functioning post office, reminding us that Benjamin Franklin was the first postmaster, made so in 1775. You see a print shop there, but that would have belonged to Ben's grandson. Ben knew what he was doing. He picked the busiest place in Philadelphia. He managed to have a print shop right behind us at 2nd and Market Street, right after Front Street. Now, Benjamin Franklin, he knew what he was doing. He had already been postmaster for Great Britain. He pretty much did everything in his lifetime. Governor of Pennsylvania at one point, president of the Pennsylvania Assembly, working as what we would call ambassador to Parliament from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and his original home, Massachusetts, years before the Revolution. On the left-hand side, the National American Jewish History Museum. So I mentioned that they had taken down the older buildings. So as we come up here along the park to our last stop, keep in mind that we did not take down a bunch of colonial and revolutionary aged buildings. We took down a bunch of mercantiles to build the park in the 1950s. So when we go around the corner, the outline of the building on the left-hand side is the president's house, but it was not our generation or our parents' generations that took it down. But that's where George Washington lived. It's also where John Adams lived, although John Adams did end up at the White House for 4 months at the end of his presidency, as it had been completed, or almost completed. We do hope you're having a good time here in Philadelphia. I hope you're enjoying the big bus ride. And if anyone has any questions, please see me downstairs.